Okay, so I hope I have everyone here. Good afternoon or morning, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion about the European economy in Trump's world. First of all, I would like to extend a thank you to our partner, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Bratislava, for supporting today's discussion. And well, let's get to it. With the start of Trump's second term in presidential office, the EU faces a renewed economic uncertainty. And that means new protectionist US trade policies, tariffs, volatile approach to transatlantic relations. All of those are putting pressure on Europe to adapt. At the same time, EU faces its own issues and challenges, such as Germany's economic stagnation, rising energy costs, and political disputes or disagreements, which are testing EU's resilience. And just last week, a couple of days ago, a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports took effect in the US, which prompted the EU to announce countermeasures, first on the selected products and furthermore, several billion, almost 20 billion worth of American goods starting in April, which are under preparation. As a response, Trump's administration is threatening with further tariffs, and they claim it's for the protection of the U.S. industry and economy. However, there has been many reactions, and the markets are disrupted, alliances are strained, and there are several concerns among European and global financial markets. For example, the American Chamber of Commerce in the EU warns that a full-scale trade war could severely impact transatlantic commerce. European Central Bank also echoed concerns. Just yesterday, the ECB vice president said they create more economic uncertainty than COVID. So the question arises, how should and could countries adapt their economic policies to remain a global power in a shifting geopolitical landscape? To help us deal with these complex issues, we will have a discussion, and we are joined by four distinguished panelists. First of all, let me welcome Mr. Michal Viezik, a member of European Parliament from Progressive Slovakia and a member of Committee on Environment, Climate and Food Safety. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation.
Next, here we have Madam Alžbeta Rukova, expert in international trade, transatlantic relations, leading the Americas Department at Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Okay. Next, there is Mr. Knut Penkin, Senior Program Officer for Labor and Social Affairs at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office in Washington. Hi.
Yeah, hi, good morning from me, or good afternoon to all of you on the other side. Thanks for having me.
Thank you as well. And last but not least, Mr. Martin Kahanec, founder and scientific director of Central European Labor Studies Institute in Bratislava, Celsi. Hi.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon.
Well, I look forward to a good discussion. Without further ado, I will now start with the first set of questions to each of you. So let me start with Mr. Viezik. What is the mood on current tariff wars in the EP? And how do you perceive will the new US administration's approach affect key EU policies, such as Green Deal, decarbonization, energy prices, competitiveness, all this happening?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. It's a good question. Let's say it like that. The mood is quite unprecedented. Let's say it like that, because really new topics arise and new paradigms as well. You know, right now we are really discussing in the European Parliament the new architecture of Europe, the new geopolitical architecture of the world. And we see that the traditional allies are becoming less reliable. We are talking about new partnerships, new guarantees, new trading routes, new partners. new security, new strategies. So everything is quite challenging in this case. The reason for that is, well, the old problem with Russia, for sure, that really puts forward a lot of challenges. We had to find new ways how to accommodate our needs for, let's say, fossil fuels and other strategic materials. But now it's becoming even more difficult with Donald Trump's administration actually showing a very new and unknown face of USA and in the terms of the relations to actually Europe as a long-term partner and ally. This is very obviously trembling. We are not anymore sure whether we can count on the support from the USA, whether USA is an ally or a competitor, or so it's quite quite a time right now. The discussions are being held within groups and in the plenary, so it's everywhere. What I actually notice is quite a very evident will to actually tackle the issue, to really come forward with solution, which on the other hand means that we actually are quite aware that the good times are already over, and we really have to think very deeply about how we can secure actually Europe and secure our needs, and in the terms of being actually as self-sufficient as possible, or even thinking beyond the box, beyond the or outside of the political box, to really seek for new partnerships. Some of them might be quite surprising. I think we are reaching forward to our future friends and allies, maybe in India, maybe in Africa, maybe in Central and Southern America, really outside of the box that has been there for decades already. So it's quite challenging, let's say it like that. And in this regard, and also with the reflection or with regard to the current composition of European Parliament, for instance, where there is very obvious prevailing of the right-oriented groups right now. The dynamics of the negotiations and of the let's say discussions has already quite changed. And you pointed your question very, very directly towards whether we actually reconsider our positioning towards, let's say, green agenda and environmental ambitions and Green Deal in general. Yeah, it might be actually the reality. But it's still in the pipeline. So we will see what the outcome will be. I personally would be rather unhappy if I would see some sort of revisionism, because it's not something that would actually improve the situation, but only being put forward on the base of some sort of populism and stuff like that. We can discuss on that later, maybe. But yeah, well, I'm here for my second term, so I can compare the previous one to this one, and it's really a very different term, let's say like that, because of the development on a global scale.
Thank you. Well, we can only hope that the policies will withstand the pressure from whatever our current developments. We can continue looking or focusing a bit more on the companies themselves and the trade. And so I would like to ask you, Madam Rukova, new tariffs and reciprocal tariffs have been announced quite recently, but they are expected to expand. And which European business sectors do you believe, or export products more specifically, will be most affected by tariffs, and maybe vice versa, which American exports to the EU might be impacted with the countermeasures?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Perhaps just to clarify to other listeners, so we've been hit with one wave of tariffs as the EU, which is the tariffs on steel and aluminum and derivative products, which started to take effect or came into effect on the 12th of March. The EU is currently working on their countermeasures. Excuse me. And in the meantime, the Trump administration has also announced another wave of tariffs, which is probably scheduled to come into effect April 2nd. We have no idea what will be the scope, if they're going to be sector specific, or if they will fall on European exports to the US as a whole. So that remains to be seen. In terms of the effects of the tariffs, I believe the European Commission and we ourselves here at the Czech Republic are still analyzing the precise impact on that. There has been a much rerouting of exports in these particular sectors historically, particularly starting 2018 when the first Trump tariffs came into effect. So, for example, in the case of the Czech Republic, some of the exports have been already rerouted, and some of the quotas then agreed with the subsequent Biden administration were not fully used or to the full capacity. So that explains that the trading routes or export routes more precisely have changed a little bit. But of course, the EU and specifically the Czech Republic and other member states are, of course, exposed to these tariffs. If we look at the EU exports generally, come to think of the possible reciprocal tariffs, in terms of the EU as a whole, it's pharmaceuticals, it's automobiles, it's machinery, but it's also, excuse me, very persistent caller, but it's also food products and chemicals and other stuff. In terms of the Czech Republic particular, it's very interesting because in our top 10 exports to the US, it's mostly products of American companies that have invested here in the Czech Republic. So it's and I'm sure that's a case of lots of other member states. So it's a very interesting to see how that will play out, whether the corporate world of the current US is going to be able to persuade the new administration to, lessen the blow or make some exemptions. It's one of the angles that we're looking at, but we have not seen much happen. And if any of you have read today's New York Times, it seems that President Trump's approach is that the tariffs are end in themselves. Apparently they're not a negotiating tool, but something that's meant to raise revenue for the US. So that's not good news for EU, and certainly also not good news for American businesses, both home and abroad, because they have to bear the costs of that as well. And perhaps one more comment, because I like the previous comments by Mr. Rizik on the EU seeking new partnerships. So I oversee both North and South America as a part of my portfolio, and there's definitely more appetite, especially from Canada, of tightening the partnership with the EU. We, of course, have the CETA, but that's not been ratified by all of the member states. But there have been some new developments, new partnerships, and I think we'll see that trend continue because the Canadians are realizing that they cannot rely on the US so much. And in the case of South America, so by the end of last year, the EU President von der Leyen signed the political agreement on the EU-Mercosur agreement. That's been 20 years in the making. That's something as the Czech Republic we're very supportive of. And we hope that we will see this deal done and ratified within the EU and further support our efforts to diversify our exports and strengthen our partnership with other like-minded partners, which is in the case not just Canada, but also South American countries. So that's all from me from now, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. It is certainly an interesting idea to assess whether EU economies are slowly shifting away from the cooperation with the US, are looking for stronger partners, or if there is some space perhaps to somehow, to some extent, recuperate the relations. And for this, I would like to ask Mr. Penkin. Good morning to Washington. So how is the point of view from the other side of the ocean? And is there an ongoing discussion in the US about how tariffs on Europe might impact, perhaps negatively, the US economy or specific industries in key states?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So just to clarify, I work for a German political foundation in the United States. So I'll give a view from the US, but not on behalf of the US. Let me put it that way. Thank you to Mr. Wiesek. Thank you to Ms. Ruklova and Mr. Kanaj. I'm glad to be here with you all. I would like to take a step back because I think it's important to look at, why are we in this position, and then, address your question in more detail. When we look back to Donald Trump's campaign in 2024, he had two central promises. One is America first. That was his understanding that the U.S. needs to act strictly in its own national interest. And as he would say it, the U.S. has been taken advantage of internationally, especially in the fields of security and trade. So while I also read the news and, say that trade is an end in itself, but it is still also a tool, and a tool not only to achieve economic policy goals, but to also achieve security and other policy goals. I think it's important to bear that in mind. The other promise was fighting inflation. So those two promises do not go well together, as many economists will tell you. And so we already see efforts by the Trump administration to change its rhetoric towards its own voters and those who supported them based on especially inflation and other issues that were on top of voters' mind in the election last year. The other piece is, how is Trump 2 different from Trump 1? And, we heard from the European Member of Parliament after, being in the second legislator, you have some historic perspective. So what's old, what's new? I think what's old is this on and off again tariffs. I think, this uncertainty or shifting of goals is part of the strategy and designed to give the US maximum leverage in negotiations. And I also think that, positive or negative market headlines still tell us more about Trump's trade policy than any trade strategy. What's new in this playbook, I would say, is we see comprehensive and, as you've mentioned, reciprocal tariffs across sectors. We see changing rationales on why tariffs are implemented, for economic reasons, for security reasons, for migration reasons. And we see Trump trade war with allies and not just competitors such as China. For those who hope that, Trump might be reined in by other actors in the US political field, Congress, or others, or courts, I think based on the rationale that he's used for his tariffs, he can basically wage his trade war with no advance notice, oversight, or any expiration date. So I don't think there's much to be expected in terms of opposition in an institutional way from the US. Does Trump have the full support for his trade war? We see traditional Republicans who are opposed to tariffs as a matter of principle, but I also have to say Republicans in Congress have given up on being a check on Trump's trade policy. I think we have to say that. You've mentioned businesses. We also work a lot with US unions. And I think there's an important nuance there when it comes to question of tariffs. Most people here in the US, businesses and unions, oppose broad tariffs and indiscriminatory tariff wars. They still believe that tariffs can play an important role in protecting certain sectors and in balancing, trade imbalances, also on a global scale with overcapacity, as we've seen in steel and aluminum. So I would say that this, also is important to keep in mind that this is not an either pro-tariff or contra-tariff discussion. I think it's more nuanced, and of course, most U.S. industrial unions oppose tariffs with their Canadian partners because they operate, and we have a strongly integrated North American market. So as a Canadian partner has said, what Trump is trying to do is unscramble an egg. You can't really do that. The supply chains are highly integrated. And so there has been forced criticism on tariffs on Canada and Mexico. How does the public react? So consumers expect higher costs. We have some noisy polling on whether consumers support tariffs or not. One of the latest polls that came out say that, 61% of American consumers are opposed to tariffs, and also a majority, at least in many polls we have seen right now oppose Trump's economic policy. So the first time ever he's actually underwater on the economy, which is an unusual spot for him to be in, and it's all self-inflicted. We have declining consumer confidence. So most consumers expect rising costs and a lower economy and higher costs for everyday living. We've heard from Ms. Ruklova the main sectors that are being affected. So yes, that is vehicles, machinery, pharma, less so semiconductors from the EU because those are mostly imported from Asia. And we might also still have an opportunity for a cooperative transatlantic economic agenda, but I want to address that a little later when we come to that part of the discussion. But maybe that's as an opening to your question, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you very much. Yes, hopefully there will be some room for more cooperative moves and agenda despite the tariff wars which have started. And furthermore, I would like to ask for a couple of introductory words, Mr. Kahanet. You specify in labor studies, what impact do you see now or upcoming for companies and workers, and perhaps what strategies should the states adopt, or how should they approach negotiations with the US to prevent further economic fragmentation or to keep their strength or position as a global power?
Thank you very much, and I'm privileged to be in this company. Thanks for the introductory remarks so far, with which I entirely agree. Now, when it comes to the current situation, of course, we should not react with some hysteria or sort of overact. But we need a surgical, very cleverly designed responses which strengthen EU's autonomy, strategic autonomy, EU's position, which are assertive, but as I mentioned, not overacting. Now, this requires that the EU pursues its strategic interests, revisiting its external policies and revisiting which of them contributes to EU's interests and which may be resulting from some internal political demands, but maybe are not exactly serving EU's external position. We need to do the same with our trade policies, regulatory framework, and industrial policy to ensure EU's competitiveness, because since more than 4 decades, I've been in, say, just to give an example, in an environmentalist movement, and I'm totally a big fan of global public goods like a livable planet, but this will not work if the EU is economically and politically sidelined and it doesn't showcase the success story of a role model. So we need to do this smartly, and that includes being competitive and being successful economically, politically, and also then in pursuing those global public goods. Now, this does involve, at least in the short, medium run, reducing overall reliance on US trade and also ensuring our security by deepening integration within the EU on economic and security issues, but also economic ties. And I agree very much with the speakers so far, including ties with Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the multilateral frameworks, which would be very necessary here. This includes more assertive EU trade policy, trade deals with the Mercosur, ASEAN to expand markets, and also leveraging EU's economic weight to push back against US tariffs. Now, this will inevitably include constructive but firm negotiations with the US and some targeted trade diplomacy, while preventing an all-out trade war. Specific deals can be helpful in aerospace. Say we have Boeing and Airbus having learned each other, having become become quite interdependent. The digital trade industry, auto industry, quite interdependent. So their specific deals can prevent economic fragmentation. And also, it's important to keep in mind and highlight mutual interests with the US, say competition with China or some other countries. That's where we can still benefit mutually. We should, I guess, already mentioned avoiding blank tariffs, but then there is I'm not an expert on foreign policy, but leveraging internal opposition to protectionist policies, pro-trade groups in the US may be helpful as well, especially in swing states. Yes? So if we target specific constituencies or specific allies in the US with the policies that could be helpful. This also, well, when it comes to security, defense capabilities, European tech, air industries, and those are some of the priorities. And I will conclude by highlighting what I think is very important here, and that is that we should, having done all of the rest, identify sales opportunities that the current policies create. Just to give you an example, sacking talents and terrorist migration will leave much of the US and international talent up for grab. Europe expelled much talent in the 20th century. Maybe it's time to get some talents back. And I see already French universities which open up and offer free entry to US talents. I see this must have been the director of JRC or someone also mentioning this. So yeah, I think that's something we could do. And also, of course, there is also a noble reason to do this if there are these talents out there looking for economic opportunities, research opportunities at universities, in industry as well. I think that's a win-win for the talents and for Europe. US reversal to fossil fuels, again, creates an opportunity for the EU to strengthen its role as a global champion of green transition. And but again, we need to do this smartly because so far I'm quite critical of what we have done so far. But I'm still a big fan of clean green technologies. The same for unilateralism on the US side now. Well, that creates room for EU to be a champion of multilateralism and global diplomacy, of champion of stability, predictability, which is good for business, so that could attract investment. And also being pushed towards strategic autonomy. Well, we should assert our role as in the sort of what Trump sees as a dichotomy of US versus China. I think there is place for the EU to be a third important geopolitical player, and that's something that we should strategically push for. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. If you wish to react, please put a sign or raise your hand, and you can continue the discussion, or I can continue with further questions. For this specifically, I would like to ask maybe Mr. Vizig, you might have something to say in this. I'm curious if there is a unified approach among the members of the European Parliament and to address the new US policy and the current developments, or do you see more independent opinions among different member states? And is there a chance or perhaps a risk that maybe states will want to take the issues also in their own hands and take individual measures?
Yeah, good question again. Thank you very much. I would say it's never a unified positioning in European Parliament. We are united in a diversity, let's say it like that, but this is rather specific in the House. I have noticed very peculiar phenomenon. Actually, the far-right groups and the populist groups in the European Parliament, yes, we have such groups as well in here, were quite celebrating the Trump's new approach. They were really celebrating that he's finally going to tackle the issues of LGBTIs and NGOs, and immense spending on international aid and stuff like that. So they were very much celebrating his first steps, despite somehow ignoring the impact of these steps on the global situation. But I didn't notice actually what was their reaction on the further steps. When Trump was introducing tariffs, they were definitely having a negative impact on our economies, on our industries, and they went to sort of a silent mode, let's say like that, because there was no reason to actually celebrate that, but that didn't stop them or prevented them from actually celebrating the previous steps. But these are the parties of the extreme, or rather be far right in this regard. So let's talk about the parties that still have the saying and that they which are pro-European and centered, say it like that. They are very much aware of the impacts of Trump's policy on Europe. And what I was really very glad to see that they actually were able to react quite fast and quite effective on the threats that are being sent towards Europe from US. So as I already mentioned, the negotiations between the pro-European parties were quite effective, and that was also very well translated on the level of Council, where majority of member states were actually willing to work and discuss on possible solutions of this new and unprecedented situation. But again, this is not univocal. We know that there are some, let's say, member states that are not the members of the club. Of the new club, I have to be rather critical to the positioning of Slovakia, of course, and to the positioning of Hungary, which really seem to play some sort of strange game. In Slovakia, it is being portrayed as a policy on all the sides, directed towards east, west, north, and south, which at the end ends up as being a sort of a Trojan horse for, I would say, Putin's Russia, unfortunately. So, but the majority of the countries are really building quite a strong bloc, where I'm quite confident that they will come with workable solutions for the situation. We are not talking only about the trade wars, of course. We are talking mainly about the security and the new situation in the geopolitical sense, where it's very clear that the majority of member states and the majority of the parliament is very much prepared to help Ukraine in their fight against Russian aggression. But now, and that's a new element, also in the fight against the Trump's aggression, let's say it like that. So we were very, very ready, the majority of the countries and the majority of the parliament groups, to support Ukraine, both economically as politically, in the sense that we already prepared quite a strong positions towards new plans of how to secure actually the Ukraine in the conflict. We are talking about economical aid. We are talking about technical aid. We are talking about all what will be necessary to actually withstand the pressure from Putin and from Trump as well. Because now it seems that Trump was actually pursuing some unorthodox steps towards President Zelensky. We all were shocked by that. The situation has developed meanwhile, but still we think that the strongest and the most important and crucial partner for Ukraine in their fight for their freedom and for their autonomy in current situation is Europe, and that's very clear. So we are ready to actually provide all that is being necessary to come to an end that would actually secure the peace, but under the conditions where Ukraine is being treated as a partner and not pushed towards some sort of simply resigning towards the pressure coming from Trump's administration and war crimes that are being pursued by the Russia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Would anyone like to add anything? Well, if not, we can move to the questions. We are getting quite a few already in the chat. And so the first is, how can the EU balance economic relations between US and China? And yeah, it might be interesting to look outside again. And is the risk that continued trade tensions could push the EU to seek deeper alliances with other global players? We already mentioned China, Mercosur. How will it play out? Anyone who would like to react?
I can't really speak to China. Also, I'm not talking from the EU position, so to speak, right? But let me maybe one point, and has been coming up. Ms. Ruplova also mentioned that the renewed effort to implement CETA completely, so the transatlantic agreement with Canada. Canada as a trading partner, I think, was, or as a political ally of Europe, was always somewhat under the shadow of the US, I would say, or, rightly or wrongly. And I'm glad to see that that is changing. On the other hand, and that's something that I mentioned earlier, especially when it comes to manufacturing, the US supply chains are so deeply integrated with Canada that it will not simply, be a question of political will, whether you want to change supply chains or redirect them. Might it be called ally shoring or whatever term you want to come up with for that? I'm kind of skeptical that this will be a solution. Also for Canada, because the vast majority of their exports, 80%, go to the US. So it's not simply, the question of political will of rebalancing. And what I do actually applaud and what I think is useful is a renewed effort to have an engagement with the global South and countries in South America and Asia on the EU side. I think also for geopolitical reasons and security reasons, that is an important piece. And on the potential for transatlantic cooperation, Mr. Khan has mentioned some items already. Let me add 2 or 3 more. I think both the EU and US are heavily dependent on critical minerals. There, I think, might still be a common interest to achieve an agreement or a deal on the sourcing of minerals. Defense procurement, it's another question that also came up in the chat already. And while that is a double-edged sword, do you want to make yourself more dependent on US capabilities by importing US defense equipment when you can't trust the partner anymore? On the other hand, it might be a leveraging tool for the EU it has to upgrade its capabilities, and it cannot produce all the equipment itself, not only in terms of scale, but also capability. So there might be an opportunity. And then, of course, the energy import question is an ongoing one. The EU already receives about 50% of its LNG from the US. There's room to grow that high. And finally, that also came up on the digital services question. I expect Trump to use any leverage they have. So I would not be surprised if the Trump administration will use digital services also as a negotiating tool, because that is also on the EU side one of the few levers the EU has, because the EU actually, or the US has a trade surplus on digital services with the EU, so it has more to lose. That definitely, or that most likely will come up as a negotiating tool, either to apply pressure to the EU, but also as a leveraging tool on the EU side in negotiations with the US. So maybe that has some additional comments and address some of the questions that came up in the chat.
Perhaps Ms. Ruklova, how do you see the issues?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask if I can comment on that. On the LNGs, I agree. It's with the energy security and the energy crisis that the EU has been through in the past 2 years. We see increased demand for LNG cargoes coming from the US. In the case of the specifically Czech Republic, I think over 90% of the LNG that we have purchased within the last 2 years has come from the US. And that, given our continued efforts to diminish our dependencies on Russian gas and oil, I think that trend is very, very likely to continue, because LNG and specifically natural gas are seen as a transition source of energy as we continue our efforts to decarbonize our economy. But I would actually like to comment on some of the issues that the Trump administration has with the EU legislation and policies, and also long-term sector grievances that they have. So I was actually with our minister, the Minister of Industry and Trade, in the US last week, and we have met with the United States Trade Representative. And I have to say it was, very sort of not pessimistic, but definitely a reality check for us here in the EU, and rather glooming vision for the upcoming months, because it has been said on multiple levels and multiple fora, but the US are not interested in engaging in negotiations at this moment, and they are sort of approaching everything as dictating their own terms and expecting their partners and allies to take up their demands. So when regarding the question on the DSA and DMA, of course the US has problem with it, and they are likely to pressure the EU to allow more market access and growth for their digital hegemons, such as the Amazon or Google or Microsoft. Actually, when you look at the trading relationship between the EU and the US, the EU has a huge surplus in terms of trade with goods, and that's very, very painful for this current administration, and they see it as very, very harmful for their domestic industries, and as a continuation of unfair treatment for their exporters. And regarding the surplus, the US surplus in services, when we phrase that with the argument that the overall trading relationship and investment relationship is somewhat balanced, the reply was, well, the EU is doing everything to kill that surplus with their DSA and DMA and other, other suits and proceedings by the Commission and by the Parliament. So they're not very open to the EU explaining to the US anything, really. They're not interested in our perceptions of our trading relationship. They're simply dictating their own terms at the moment. And the question right now, and I'm sure it's a very intense debate in the EU Parliament, in the capitals, in the Commission, basically everywhere. How does the EU respond? So we've the Commission and the overall EU are now working on introducing the aforementioned countermeasures, and it remains to be seen what will be the next steps. Yeah. So sorry, just to wrap up. So I'm actually very curious. There are a lot of grievances, not the DSA DMA, but also the European cars coming to the US. It's the European pharmaceuticals. It's the agri exports from Italy and France. It's also, let's say, the geographical indicators from the EU side. It's the fact that we don't allow GMO products in our market. We've been asked, why is that? Why is there why isn't there a bigger support for these for these exports coming to the EU? And when we replied, it's the public opinion. You can't really force the public to accept something they're not willing to. So it's a very difficult debate.
Thank you. Mr. Kanets, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you very much. So how we can balance economic relations between the US and China? Well, first we need to know what we want. What's our dream? What's our strategic goal? And in my view, this is strategic autonomy, that is pragmatic collaboration with each of them on issues like climate change, trade, etc. When it comes to security, we need to collaborate with US, but also deepen our own security integration in the security domain and build our own capabilities and resources so that we can play that role. And if we see ourselves as the third pole on the globe, then that also means we can play different, mediating roles in the US-China relationships. But before that, we need to address the problems that Ms. Ruklova already mentioned. If our current position appears to be so weak, then we need to mobilize our strengths and ensure that we project those strengths into the global arena effectively. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Another question from the chat, maybe Mr. Vízik, could we expect any resolution on the issue from the EU Parliament?
Yes, of course. Like, we can provide a lot of resolutions. Like, that's not the problem. But they will not tackle the situation, of course. The effort that we need to actually deliver is really having some solid strategies and policies that could really translate into the real world and being properly implemented. And the problem is that there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution for this problem, because this problematic is very complex. So of course it's not about resolutions. They are merely the reflections of the opinions inside of the parliament and the majority in the parliament. But if there is no cooperation between, let's say, parliament and especially member state and European Commission, and if we are not able to provide really coherent policies that will really be effective in responding to this new situation, then no resolution will actually save the day. So what I actually my gut feeling is that the people who are by the table, who are trying to negotiate, who are trying to prepare for the situation, are actually really willing to find the solutions. It's not really only formal. It really seems that all of the important players are quite aware of the grievances of the situation, that this is really a new epoch, a new era, that the old setup of the whole global architecture is somehow being very very abruptly decomposed, something like that, that we cannot count on any sort of formal or former agreements. So we have to find a new way how to react, how to function, and we have to find it really fast. So this is the let's say gravity of the moment right now. It's really serious. It's really very much needed to get rid of some formal agreements, of some formal promises, but we really need to get to the root and find the solution. It's quite difficult, because of the situation in the US itself. The strategy of Trump's administration is either really genius, like we cannot say what he actually wants to achieve, but we have the feeling that he's going toward the direction, or it's really chaotic. And we will maybe see in weeks, days, months what the outcome will be. Right now, I really can't say what the impact of the current policy actually will be, because it's changing on a daily basis. We are talking about tariffs that are being put into the field and they are being taken back and postponed and stuff like that. And as I follow the situation, I really can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because to me it really seems that Trump's administration is desperately trying to fulfill the promises that he puts to the public during his election campaign. But in that regard, he somehow ignores the impacts of those promises. When we are talking about tariffs, it's definitely a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. It's not going to improve the US economy, quite contrary, and it's going also to have a detrimental effect on the European economy and stuff like that. When we were talking about automotive industry, that again has a context. Because the tariffs put on automotive industry will definitely have a detrimental effect on European industries, but it's rather a specific effect, because if you assess properly the segment that we are actually exporting towards US, it's really not an everyday car. It's rather those expensive branches of cars, that are being exported towards USA. And what the outcome of the new tariffs will actually be. Where for the customer who is willing to buy a European car for a price of $150,000, let's say, it might not be a big problem to add another 6,000 or 7,000 to buy it. So the effect might not be that profound as expected. But if in the case that the 25% tariffs will be administered, it definitely will have an impact on the European market and the European industry, and we might talk about actually affecting at least 3,000 employees in the Slovakia, for instance, directly, and another, let's say, 15,000 indirectly. So that's quite an impact. But the automotive industry has to adapt to the situation. So they have two options, right? Either to fire those people, not to have these expenses without actually someone buying their cars, or finding a new partnerships or new markets. And in that regard, again, it was stressed already several times. There are markets that we need to actually correlate on and work properly on. And it really seems that the alternative for the US market for these expensive brands of cars might be Mercosur countries or maybe Canada, and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, Europe might not be that much impacted by the tariffs as the US might be impacted by the tariffs, So I really wonder whether Trump's administration is really fully aware of the consequences of their deeds, and whether their policies will prove to be really workable or chaotic. That's the question of the day and of the month and maybe of the year. But after a year, we'll probably be very aware of the situation, and we'll comprehend completely whether Trump is a good president or a person that was, that is in the place of the president, but it's really doing rather harm than a good deed for the US. We will see.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kahanec?
3 comments from an economist on this, and 2 positive and 1 negative. 1 negative is that it not only matters what kind of tariffs are implemented on European exports, but also on other exports like China, etc., because their production capacities are already there in place, and so the competition for our production will go up. Those markets will become more competitive, and so everybody will be looking for other markets, other buyers, and so that's the negative one. On the positive, if you think about the macroeconomy, import tariffs are likely to increase the exchange rates, and so of the price of the dollar. And that will actually work to counteract some of the effects of tariffs. If the dollar will strengthen, that will actually make our relative position slightly better. Of course, this is not guaranteed. Yes, the dollar will strengthen. Now we see it weakening, and so there are other factors. Yes, other factors. But tariffs on their own, import tariffs on their own, have that effect. That's number 2, and potentially more on the positive side. And then number 3 is also on the positive side, that they create winners and losers. Yes, tariffs create winners and losers, and that includes those buyers of those goods, which will need to pay the tariff, plus the the general increase in prices and lessened through the tariff itself, also lesser decreased competition in the US market potentially, and so that will also work towards higher prices in the US, and so consumers will not be particularly happy and exporters will not be particularly happy, and so in this particular struggle, these might be our allies more or less directly. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Yes,
maybe on that, Ms. Logova. I think the hope springs eternal that consumers and supporters for Donald Trump and Republicans will realize that the current economic policy measures are not to their benefit. And I would be cautious for a number of reasons. Number one, we've seen in the first Trump administration, there's certain groups that are core supporters of the Republican Party, such as farmers, are hit by retaliatory tariffs. The U.S. was willing to step in and subsidize with billions of dollars certain industries to soften the blow. I expect something similar to happen with retaliatory tariffs on soybeans and other agricultural products by China, but also potentially by the EU. Secondly, we have to be increasingly skeptical of official statistics and data, and I don't want to be, alarmist, but there is talk in the US of changing how the GDP is calculated. There's been massive troves of data being taken down on government websites. So, official statistics might not tell us the whole picture in the future, which of course is terrible for any business decision, but also, to make arguments in favor or against certain economic policies. And lastly, the price point question, we've seen interesting communication from the Trump administration that the realization of the American dream is not to buy cheap consumer goods from China. I don't know where they want to go with that message, and it might not resonate particularly well when you give outsized influence to billionaires and at the same time tell consumers that's not the fulfillment of life to buy cheap goods. So I don't think that argument will carry very far, but what it tells me is that the administration is willing to use, actual policy and communication means to deflect from the damaging effects that their own policies have on the American consumers. So the hope that they might be allies in any kind of negotiation or putting pressure on the administration, I'm somewhat skeptical. I'm not saying this will not, have any corrective effect, but I will be somewhat skeptical on that. And maybe the last piece, maybe for the EU as an idea of how other trading partners are dealing with the current Trump administration. We've heard from our Canadian partners that their negotiation strategy is, staying firm on your interests, on what you're, willing to do or not to do, and rather have a short, intense, straight fight instead of a longer drawn-out trade war. That the longer tariffs are in effect, the more damage they do. So I think an expedient resolution on certain questions to get the ball rolling and kind of help lower the temperature, I think that might be a good way to go. But of course, I'm in no position to give the EU any kind of advice on its negotiating strategy with the US. But this is something, I think the EU looks closely probably also at how other trading partners are dealing with the current administration here. So that's just something that I've heard from our partners to the north. And back to you.
Yeah, I see Ms. Rukola.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Panknin a question relating that you mentioned that in the previous Trump administration, there were, of course, handouts and subsidies to the corporate America and also to the farmers that have been target of the Chinese tariffs and perhaps EU countermeasures as well. How do you see Mr. Musk's agenda and the Doge playing into that? Because I've read that the current cuts into the federal government made by Doge, or the suggestions, and the pause on US aid, but also some domestic programs, have led to some of the farmers losing their subsidies and having issues with their businesses. It's also, I think, it's people being able to afford some sort of a living standard that are also being hit by these measures, and they're within the Republican constituency. So yeah, how do you see Doge playing into that?
Yeah, another crystal ball question, I would say. So it's very hard to make up, any kind of sense on what's going on. What is clear, I think, are two or three things to kind of, in a broader picture. I think apart from the painful episodes of, closing departments, firing federal employees at a scale of tens of thousands, additional cuts are coming, and is to remake the federal government. The question is, do they really want to make it more efficient, or is it just a way to fulfill, longstanding Republican conviction that, the federal government is corrupt and wasteful, and that it supports those who are undeserving of the support, so to speak, also highly racial overtones. So it is, questionable, since Elon Musk's business, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, has received massive government contracts. Most of his businesses wouldn't be where they are today or profitable if it wasn't for public support, be it, his Tesla business, be it SpaceX. And so you see massive conflicts of interest, of course, with those coming into the federal government. I think in the best interpretation, the idea is to, include a kind of a business mindset into the government, make it more efficient, apply technology on a broader scale, to make government, more accountable and better for its citizens. I doubt this is the effect that it will have. As you've mentioned before, in terms of trade and using a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. So yeah, we've not really seen a very specific targeted approach to dismantling certain programs that might not be beneficial or that are, wasteful. So we basically seen an ideological approach to dismantling government, and it doesn't bode well for the future. And my sense is, once those services are severely damaged, so that everyday Americans who receive their pension, who receive any kind of public support, notice that this will also put pressure. But as I've said, we've seen the logic of, or the political calculations when it comes to the Trump administration before, is being kind of, above what you would expect happen to you politically when you do certain things. So I would be cautious to say that this will have a massive impact. I think a good indicator will be congressional elections next year. If there is a massive repudiation also of Republicans in Congress by voters based especially on Trump's economic policy, that might be a hopeful sign that you can, push the envelope only so far. But at this point, I'm still very cautious on whether this will have a massive impact on the political calculation of the current administration or a change of course of their policies. And I don't want to speculate any further on, how long will Elon Musk stay in Trump's good graces, or when's the fallout coming that everybody's expecting. I think those are very speculative. As long as this relationship is beneficial to both of them, I think, you'll see a continued influence of Musk in the dismantling of the US government. And the question is, are we reaching a breaking point? What is that breaking point? Is there a point to return? Can you, repair the damage in 4 years? Let's not forget, US administrations sometimes want to enact change that lasts generations, but they're usually very time constrained, right? So we've seen it with Joe Biden and his industrial policy. The benefits did not pay out in time. My sense is, Donald Trump's tariff approach will also might do enough damage, but the reshoring of business into the US and massive new employment in manufacturing or anything to that degree, I don't think will materialize. And it's no wonder why, because, 4 years is a very short time and we want to restructure whole industries or supply chains. So I'm doubtful that this will have the effect that Trump is promising, but what that means politically for his future, for the brand, for the future of the brand, I think is still in doubt.
Mr. Penkin, I'm curious, you mentioned possible impacts on households or the voters, but also from political perspective, also the businesses. So maybe a short comment, how do you believe, or do you believe these strategies will have full support also from the Republican Party itself, or might there be some disruptions within the Republican spectrum?
Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned that before. We've seen, criticism before, be it the big three automakers that appealed directly to the administration, be it the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that has criticized the broad tariffs, be it industrial unions that have criticized the broad tariffs. So core supporters also of the Republican Party have voiced their concerns, and so far they have not, had any effect. And I think Ms. Rukova mentioned that also her impression on negotiations with the current administration. There are very few things Donald Trump is sure of or convinced of, I would say, but the tariffs are something good, seems to be something that has really stuck with him against, of course, all evidence. But that means also, you don't need any evidence of things working in the right way. So, I'm afraid that, this idea that tariffs will generate revenue that you need for tax cuts then, or that tariffs will, restructure the American economy in a beneficial way, I think are far from reality, but unfortunately very much in the mindset of the current administration. I don't see much, even, there was hope that his economic advisory team, Nick, Bess, and others who are more mainstream people when it comes to economic policy on the Republican side, they've so far, probably also against their own evidence, repeated, the talking points of the White House. So I don't see a lot of internal pushback. And as I said, the big question is, will there be enough pain inflicted on voters and supporters for the current administration that this will change course, or will, what we've seen right now in terms of communication, that this pain is worth it in the long term for a bigger gain, that this will stick. American consumers are usually very impatient, and so there is hope that this will create enough backlash, but at this point we're not seeing it yet. And so far we only see soft data, right, on economic policy. There's no hard data yet that the labor market is tanking, or other issues. They might come because there's a lag, and our economist, Mr. Kanahan, could probably explain that in better ways. But so far we've only seen tanking soft data. We've not seen hard data yet that will indicate that the US is on its way to a recession. But probabilities have already doubled from 15 to 30%, and it is likely that there is more pain to come.
Now I would like to move on back to the EU for a bit. There was one question that mentioned that Europe currently is quite dependent on outsourcing energy, defense, and becoming self-sufficient will take quite a long time. So what could EU do in the meantime? And I would like to add to that, I read recently one estimate from the IMF where they commented also Europe's internal barriers, which affect the EU's market as well. And there was an estimate that Europe's internal barriers are equivalent to 45% tariff for manufacturing and 110 for services. So how should or could the EU address the issue also on the inside to maybe be more self-sufficient and more competitive? Either Mr. Kanec, Mr. Basic, Ms. Rukova.
Well, I could try. Thank you for the question. So, first of all, Europe should not give up on free trade, on multilateralism, on gains from trade. So that should be a sort of long-run objective. But given the situation, and not only given the situation, it's a general recommendation to increase the resilience of its economic and infrastructure and that includes removing barriers in the single market, creating more interconnections, and that may involve some temporary relief for some very heavily affected industries, which might be hurt by the tariffs too much in the short run. So yes, that could be, but generally diversifying supply chains, expanding capacities, also storage capacities, so that short-run fluctuations, short-run disruptions do not impact on our infrastructure that much. Of course, there are some tough questions: where to get energy from, and where to get fighters from, right? So that and some of those things are not so easy to address in the short run, but we should work. That includes, of course, greening of energy and becoming more independent. But these are long-term processes which do take some time. So I acknowledge that, and we need to work hard on that. But yeah, I guess this would be some remarks from my side on this. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Basic, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. I think that there is another thing that Europe should not give up on, and that is actually the European Green Deal. And I will explain why. Because when it started in 2019, this was really a massive framework, and very innovative, very reforming, and it affected around 50 really significant chapters in the European legislation that needed to be transformed in order to achieve the climate neutrality and all those related topics. And so from the very beginning, the main point of the Green Deal was actually to tackle the climate crisis, which is an existential crisis. So there was a very profound environmental element, which was out of any doubt that it could be actually achieved by this massive framework. But it very soon has become very clear that that's not the only added value of this framework. In 2020, when the COVID pandemic actually stroked the whole global economy and had really a strong influence on any aspect of our life, it started to be very clear that the Green Deal has also a proper response to that situation. And based on that huge potential of Green Deal and the transformation embedded in it that they have on economy, was actually proved again to be a strong economical tool that could be more effective in recovering the economy of European Union than coming back to burning of fossil fuels. So there was another layer, the economical advantage of the Green Deal. And in 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine, it was also very clear that it actually enables us and allows us to get free from the dependency on fossil fuels imports from Russia. So it was also proven to be a very strong geopolitical tool, allowing us to get rid of harmful dependence on third countries that have proven themselves not to be reliable partners in this regard. So I think that really Green Deal was able to provide us with solutions on environmental, economic, and geopolitical level. So that was really a win-win-win tool for many of our problems. Now we see a tendency actually to rethink this paradigm, but as I see it, it's really not happening in reality. The new plan of the new Commission towards next 5 years is orienting itself more on industry. But the plan is called Clean Industrial Deal. That clean is very important, because what does it mean to be a clean industry is actually very well explained by and I always forget the name of the Italian who prepared that report. What is his name?
Draghi?
Draghi report. I'm sorry about it. It was very much embedded in the Draghi report, who says, industry in Europe needs to be strong again, needs to be competitive again, but it cannot be done without it being transformed towards low carbon industry, towards the decarbonization and towards the renewable resources of energy. So the Green Deal is really deeply embedded into this new clean industrial deal, and I'm pretty much sure that we will stick to its main ideas. It helps us also to face the current situations from US, actually, because it was already mentioned that the imports from US on LNG gas are quite on the rise. But we also have to be aware that US is using these imports as a sort of a leverage in the negotiations, and we already had some reports from or some reactions from the European Commissions claiming that we actually don't need that much of that LNG, but we will import it in order to somehow accommodate American president and trying to prevent him to impose those tariffs on us because we import that much of that LNG. So the real point of that is that we actually don't need that much energy, and it's because the green transitions, if we want, or the renewable resources are really on a steep rise inside of European Union. And I think that it's since 2024 when we in European Union generate more electricity from solar and from wind compared to gas, actually. So it shows that the development is really still in the merits of the Green Deal, and I think that it will continue this way. And it's not because of the political decisions, but because of the economic reality and all those benefits that these green sources of energy actually provide us with. So just to wrap up, I really think that we really need to have a complex solutions toward this very complex and new reality. But I think that the Green Deal will definitely be a firm part and a pillar of these strategies for the years to come.
Thank you. For this, I have one follow-up question, maybe for Ms. Rukova. Do you believe, from the point of view of companies or industry, could the EU's response mechanisms such as strategic industrial policies or specific programs, Clean Industrial Deal, and so on, actually help mitigate the impact of trade tensions?
Thank you. That's a good question, and I think they possibly could. It's hard for us to actually measure their impact at this moment because the legislation is still being introduced and implemented. We have seen, well, obviously, Mr. Wiesik spoke about Green Deal and its commitments. I think all of the EU, all of the member states are still very much committed to it. But as was already mentioned, the Draghi report introduces puts much more stress on competitiveness of the EU businesses into this discussion. So we are now trying to, I think, overall balance our commitments to net zero economy, but also maintaining the competitive edge of our industries and businesses. Obviously, the new programs introduced by the Commission, not just in terms of the Green Industrial Act or Net Zero Industrial Act, but also the efforts to, well, I don't want to say minimize, but scale back certain aspects of regulation that we have in the EU. All of this are combined efforts to really bolster European businesses and European industrial sector. I think it's interesting to compare it, for example, with Canada, who's been currently hit with Trump tariffs. They've actually introduced some subsidies and loan schemes for their farmers and other sectors that are being hit by the tariffs. I don't think we will. Well, first of all, it would be within I think mostly in the national purview of the member states to introduce these measures. But I don't think it's on the, it's on the agenda at this moment. Right now, I think we're really focusing on the EU striking back, basically. And as has been already said by Knut, we don't have a crystal ball, so we'll have to see what are the next steps. But I think overall, these tariffs and the new administrations are really forcing European Union and other trading partners of the US to look hard at their trading relationships and their dependencies and their own competitiveness and think more strategically and diversifying their exports and building new alliances, which for the EU could be, for example, the aforementioned Mercosur or tightening the relationship with Canada.
Thank you very much. We have the last 10 minutes of the discussion. So I have one last round of the final question. It applies to you all. It's kind of an open question, so you can pick what you consider most important in the area. And the question is, what would be your top policy or measure recommendation to navigate the current tariff or trade disputes, and who, in your opinion, can benefit or lose the most from the current situation? Is it EU, the US, or all the other countries around in the world, the international partners? You can start however you feel.
Maybe from the US side, I think the best policy is to state what your interests are, and to be firm on that. So I think not just with this administration in the US, but I think previous administrations and future ones, I think the better the EU can articulate its national interests or its interest as a partner, as a global partner, I think the better, the better off you are, no matter what the outcome of the confrontation is or the tariff war. So I think that would be my recommendation. I think the most to lose actually is on this side of the Atlantic. The US is losing rapidly credibility in the international sphere. It's losing partners. I just heard in this discussion it might lose talent in the future. It might lose the race towards green technology. And, I think there are a number of real big concerns. It loses, its soft power. And so while it might be economically difficult the next couple of months or maybe even years on the EU side, I think the US has more to lose in this right now. And the current administration is doing everything to be on the losing.
Yep.
Okay, maybe I can follow. I think that actually Europe might be a winner in this at the end of the day, because in order to really tackle the situation, we need to think of ways how to deeply and thoroughly reform our way of actually being. So we really need to talk about really some critical issues related with our defense, related with our new partnerships, new strategies, but also related to, for instance, on simplifications, of everyday's legislation and all those duties that we actually imply on Europeans, on our own market, on our own industries, on our own farmers. So if we are going to succeed in this, we will come out as a stronger and better functioning continent. And I think that this could be really a great improvement of the situation, because it actually forces us to look deeply and directly towards topics and areas that we actually refuse to look in for decades already, after the let's say Second World War. So right now we probably are going to become more major continent. And I really hope that at the end of the day we will be stronger and better working Europe that could secure many of those roles that actually USA has been securing for decades already for the world. So I'm looking forward to that.
Very hopeful that it will work out. Mr. Kainz or Mrs. Rokova?
If Mr. Kahanes doesn't mind, I'll take the floor. I think that's a very interesting question in terms of who has most to lose. Economically, both sides have a lot to lose. In terms of, let's say, technological dependencies, the EU has a lot to lose because we're, I think, overall very, very dependent on US technologies here that we have in the EU, and it's going. I mean, if you look at quantum computing, cloud providers, AI right now, it's clear that we and the Commission's already trying to, and specific member states as well are trying to step up their efforts in these areas. So that's good, and hopefully we'll see more resilience in the upcoming years in that sector. In terms of, let's say, geopolitics, I think both the EU and the US have a lot to lose because ultimately it's our systemic rivals that benefit from these trading wars. And actually, it's one of the points that we have repeated a number of times to the Americans during various meetings. And I think they're aware of that, but they don't really see it as a relevant argument at this point in time, or at least this early in the new administration. You know, because one of the points that many are making is that EU and the US could cooperate towards their shared policies on China. But with this trading war, who ultimately benefits? It's most likely China. So, you know, it's about balancing these things, and we will see what the future brings next. So hopefully there will be, as Mr. Wizik said, and I'm hopeful as well, that Europe, you know, will become more competitive, perhaps less reliant on the US in certain areas, and it will more grow into its role that reflects the size of its market and the size of its population and the size of its potential, basically. So we really need that political and economic leadership to step up in that area. But I think we're seeing steps in that direction, and I'm sure we'll see it even more in the upcoming months and years.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kanitz?
Thank you very much. I totally agree with the four speakers. It indeed is the time when you see your systemic weaknesses, and it's an urgent call to actually address those and to deal with those, to ensure all those things that we already mentioned: resilience, competitiveness, and others. We need to also, it's time to identify what are the opportunities and seize them. Yes, and so we already mentioned a couple of them. This could be talents. This could be leadership in a green economy. This should be being leadership in multilateralism, global diplomacy, stability, predictability. But for all that, I would like to underscore what Knut said about strategic leadership and stating our interests, and there he said national interest. That he corrected himself, and this shows one of the weaknesses, yes, that we have here in Europe. But it's important to also strengthen our institutions to speak one voice and be able to clearly state our European interest, and then go for it and make sure that we are predictable partner in global politics, but also that we can firmly stand for our interest. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Well, we've reached almost the end of our time for the discussion. So I would like to thank you all for sharing your interesting ideas, opinions, and expertise. There is certainly a lot to see in the upcoming days, and but also the longer future, because the situation really develops on a very fast basis. I believe currently at the same time as Mr. Trump was having a phone call with Mr. Putin from Moscow, so we will see where that leads. But thank you very much for participating, and I certainly hope to see you and speak to you again in future discussions. And yes, thank you again for connecting today.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.